Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Stewart. I'm the convener of the committee, and can I welcome you today to the meeting of the Public Petitions Committee. And as always, can ask that you all turn off your mobile phones or electronic devices because it interferes with our sound systems. No apologies have been received to date. And agenda item 1 is consideration of a current petition. The first item of business is consideration of PE 1453 by Caroline Wilson in behalf of the Evening Times and the Kidney Research UK Scotland on an opt-out system of organ donation in Scotland. The committee has taken evidence this morning via video conference from Mark Drakeford, who is the Minister for Health and Social Services, and Pat Vernon, who is the Head of Policy for Organ and Tissue Donation Legislation of the Welsh Government. Could I remind all members that because of the technical aspects of the video link, a delay will occur between members finishing their questions and the witnesses hearing them and responding. Equally, there is a delay the other way round. Because we are using a video link, it is important that no one tries to speak over anyone else. Therefore, members should speak only if called to do so and not try to interrupt a colleague or the witnesses, as that will affect our ability to hear the answers. So could I welcome the Minister, Mr Drakeford, and Ms Vernon, and could I ask members to first of all introduce themselves? I think I've already done so. I'm David Stewart. I'm the Labour member for the Highlands and Islands and the convener of the committee.
I'm Chick Brodie. I'm SNP member for the South of Scotland.
John Wilson, SNP member for Central Scotland.
David Torrance, SNP member, Kirkcaldy constituency.
Anne McTaggart, member of the Scottish Parliament for Glasgow.
Angus MacDonald, SNP member for Falkirk East.
Jackson Carlaw, Conservative member for the West of Scotland and Conservative Health spokesman.
I hope you can hear us, Minister and Ms Vernon. And could I start by asking the Minister to make a brief opening statement, probably around 5 minutes, Minister. I'll start off by asking a few questions, and my colleagues then will all take turns asking questions. We have approximately an hour, but we don't necessarily need to use all our time. But can I start by asking you if you make a short introduction? And thanks very much for cooperating with the video conferencing.
Well, Convener, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to give evidence to you this morning. Organ donation saves lives, and therefore increasing the rate of organ donation allows us to save more lives here in Wales. 35 people died last year in Wales on the organ donor waiting list. And that's the key motivation for the changes that we have brought about here in Wales. I think over the last 20 years, a great deal has been achieved in improving medical practice in the field of organ donation. But as the latest UK-wide strategy taking organ donation and transplantation to 2020 says, if we're going to make further progress in the future, then what we need is a continuing evolution in practice, but a revolution in consent rates. One of the ways in which in Wales we believe that we are able to improve consent rates is by moving to a soft opt-out system. From the 1st of December 2015, people who are citizens of Wales will have 3 choices to make in relation to organ donation. They will continue to be able to opt in and put their names on the organ donor register. They will be able to opt out, and in the newly fashioned register, they will be able to have their opt-out decision recorded. Or they can choose to do nothing. And by choosing to do nothing, they will know that that will mean that their consent to organ donation will be deemed. And it is clear to us from evidence that we have taken that ethically, deemed consent is not a poor person's consent. It is absolutely equally valid with the other 2 forms of making your views known. Now, we have been involved in a prolonged period of debate over this matter in Wales. This isn't something that we have moved towards quickly. The debate at the National Assembly level began in 2008. It has progressed through a number of committee inquiries and pieces of work with the public. By the time we came to the 2011 National Assembly elections, the state of the debate had crystallised sufficiently that 3 of the 4 political parties represented at the National Assembly had a commitment to legislate to bring about a deemed consent system in their election manifestos. Post-2011, a further extended period took place in which we went through a white paper, a bill, the whole process of the Assembly before moving through the full legislative process. And even now, we will have a 2-year period of continuing engagement and education to make sure that by the time the bill goes live on the 1st of December 2015, we will have done everything we can to make sure that people in Wales are aware of the changed law and the new choices available to them. We think it will make a modest contribution to increasing organ donation. We expect 15 extra donors in a year as a result of this legislation, and an average donor results in 3 organs for donation. So 45 extra organs for donation as a result of this piece of legislation in an average year. Nevertheless, that is a significant contribution to making further inroads into the lists of people who are waiting for donation. The bill has been a popular success. It has very substantial and growing support amongst the Welsh population, and we are confident by the time it comes to be fully implemented, both that we will have an informed public and that we will have a regime that will allow us to make further progress in increasing the levels of donation here in Wales.
Well, Minister, thank you very much for explaining that so clearly. We'll now go over to questions and points, and could also encourage Ms Vernon, if you wish to contribute any time, please catch my eye, and I'll be very happy to take you on board in any questions and points. And again, perhaps put on record my thanks to the Evening Times for all the work they've done in this campaign. It's raised awareness, I think, very well in Scotland, and it's a good example of, I think, how our petition system works. And as you know, we visited your Parliament to watch your petition system, and you have a very similar and an excellent system in Wales. The first question, I think you've kind of covered, but just for the record, perhaps you could just define for this committee, how would you define the soft opt-out in terms of exact definition? That would be very useful as a starting point for us.
When the Act comes into being, as I said, people in Wales will have 3 choices. One choice will be to take no action. If you take no action, then you will be choosing to have your consent to organ donation deemed. We call it a soft opt-out system, however, because there is a continuing role for the family in our legislation. Donation can never go ahead without the involvement of the family. The role the family has in law in Wales will be this, that at the point of donation, if someone has their consent deemed, the family will always be asked whether they have better information about the potential donor's views. And if the family knows that although that person had not taken the step of opting out, they would not wish donation to have gone ahead, family members will be able to contribute that piece of information. And in those circumstances, donation will not happen. But what the family are asked to do is not to represent their point of view, but to represent what they know of the views of the potential donor. And that's why the soft word comes into our system.
Thanks, that's very helpful. And again, you've touched on evidence, Minister, before your Parliament. Can you tell me a little bit more about the evidence that your Parliament and your government took? How convincing was the evidence about soft opt-out for you?
Well, we took some extensive evidence of experience elsewhere in Europe in particular. There was a pre-existing study through the University of York, which had done a very broad review of the available literature, and we secured an update of that through one of the London colleges. It was clear to us that there is a strong association between an opt-out system and levels of organ donation. Now, when you get down to the precise level of the system that any one country operates, there are always going to be contextual and cultural factors that mean you can't simply transpose that experience into a Welsh or indeed no doubt into a Scottish context. But if you take the sort of meta-analysis and you look at the picture across all of those experiences, there is no country where a move to an opt-out system is not associated with enhanced levels of organ donation. And we were confident that at that level, the evidence was very secure.
My final question before I move on to my colleagues is, I was quite interested in looking at some evidence from Spain. And there, as you know, what they found was they achieved, their objective, like I think all countries in Europe, is to have higher donation rates for organs and tissues. But they found the solution, and this is not a 0-7 game, of course, but they found their solution was much better coordination of transplants rather than looking at opt-in or opt-out. But I do accept that it's not necessarily one against the other, it's just looking at what's most appropriate for that country. What's your view on the Spanish example?
Yeah, well, I think you make a very important point, and I tried to say in my opening remarks that we have never claimed that a move to an opt-out system by itself is a sufficient condition to driving up rates of organ donation. It is a contribution amongst a series of other contributions that need to be made. And better alignment of the system, making the practical arrangements work better, making sure that you have proper expertise amongst those people who advise families in that incredibly difficult set of circumstances that they find themselves, all make a contribution. I think our conclusion is, though, that much of what was achieved in Spain through the better alignment of different aspects of their system has already been achieved across the United Kingdom as a result of the very significant work that's gone on over the last 20 years. And when I quoted what the new strategy says, an evolution in practice, there are no huge gains to be made by radical new steps in practice. The real gain is to be made in the regime of consent, and that's why we've taken the action we have.
Thanks, that's a very useful point. Ms Vernon, do you wish to add anything at this stage?
I don't think I can add anything much to what the Minister's already said, but as he indicated, we did review the international evidence, and we looked at, or rather a colleague from one of the London colleges looked at the evidence that had been published since, and I would sort of concur that it does show a strong association with an increased rate of donation. So I think we felt that that was quite a strong sort of indication in favour.
Thank you for that. I now bring my colleague Chick Brodie.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Mr. Vernon. I want to go back to the role of the family, and if I may just extend that into, perhaps you can enlighten us as to views of any interest groups that have participated in the consultation. How do you guarantee that the instructions that have been given by the donor are carried out as instructed, i.e. they're not contested by the family?
Yes, Mr Brodie, thank you for that. That was a subject of very considerable debate during the committee stages of the bill here in the Assembly, because our law is predicated on the views of the donor being paramount. Now, how can a donor make sure that their views prevail? Well, there are two essential safeguards in our system. The first is that you will still be able to opt in or opt out. So if you want to be sure that you are a strong supporter of organ donation, you don't want any ambiguity about your views, you can put your name on the register in future as having opted in, and that view will then prevail. If you are anxious that your views might in some way be contested by a family member because you know that your views are different to theirs, then in our Act you are able to appoint a representative. And that representative then exercises the consent on your behalf. So if you do have, not all families share views entirely, not all families are straightforward, And if you have anxieties in Wales on that score, you can choose anybody you like, who you would have confidence that would represent your view, and that person then is making the decision on your behalf. They are giving expressed consent. So whether you definitely don't want to be a donor and you want your representative to be able to represent that, or you definitely do, you have that extra safeguard in our legislation.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. My question also included the involvement of faith groups, interest groups, and their stance in the run-up to the enactment of your bill.
Yes, thank you. Well, we had a lively debate with faith communities in Wales. Some faith groups simply take the view that deemed consent is not consent. And in many ways, there's nothing I am able to do, or would wish to do, really, to persuade people of that point of view to share my own. We have to respect that view. What faith groups in Wales have been clear on, however, is that they are all, whether that is faith groups of a Christian persuasion or we have a substantial Muslim community in Wales, they are all in favour of increasing rates of organ donation. And they are very keen to work with us in the post-legislative context to make sure that members of their faiths work positively with the new law. We will take extra steps during the 2 years of education and information to reach faith groups where we believe that levels of understanding of the law need to be improved. You will know, for example, that the need for donation is higher amongst people of a Muslim heritage than it is amongst other parts of the community, and yet rates of donation are lowest amongst people of Muslim faiths. We will do a very particular piece of work with Muslim communities here in Wales, including faith leaders, to make sure that this 2-year period is used to improve understanding and, we hope, participation in the scheme thereafter.
Again, very interesting. In terms of, if I may just ask one last question, Convener, is clearly you've done a lot of work and you know, what seems to be excellent work in terms of communicating this, but have you ascertained any shift in terms of significant shift in public support for the your planned programme in terms of the number of people who support the opt-out option?
Yes, thank you. We have a regular series of opinion testing that goes on independent of government, although funded by us for this purpose. The most recent figures showed a significant shift in favour of the new law, and reductions both in those people who said that they were undecided and in those people who said that they would opt out as a result of the new law. And that shift in opinion has been most pronounced amongst younger age groups. In other words, the more we've talked about it, and the more people have had these debates around their own kitchen tables and so on, the more we see opinion shifting and settling in favour of the new regime in Wales. And we will continue to track those changes over the next 2 years.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Jackson Carlow.
Good morning, Minister. It sounds as if you have resolved many of the issues with which we have been and continue to wrestle. So I doubt there's any of the questions we're asking this morning that aren't touching on the very subjects that you've had to come to an agreement about. Can I just follow up on 1 or 2 points that you've made? You said that at the last election, the 3 main parties went into that committed to a change in the system. I'm interested to know, was that by coincidence, or was there a level of consensus and agreement between the parties that that would be the way that the issue would be approached?
3 of the 4 main parties at the Assembly had a commitment in their manifestos. It wasn't by design or pre-agreement, but I think it was the product of the 4 years that had preceded that election, in which all parties in the Assembly had been involved in the exploratory work that had gone on at committee level. The successive reports that were produced within the Assembly were all produced on a cross-party basis, not always with everybody agreeing, but with all parties involved in the production of those reports. And I think amongst 3 parties there was a feeling that the state of public opinion in Wales had reached a point of crystallisation where it was now possible to move from debate to actual positive action.
And do you think it was important for the success of the legislation that, in fact, that broader consensus amongst a number of parties existed at the point at which it was decided to move forward with legislation?
I think that has been very important. Even with agreement at the headline level between parties, as the legislation made its way through the Assembly, there were differences of emphasis and different points of detail between parties who agreed on the headline, but it was always my own point of view in taking this legislation through the Assembly that this was not a sort of legislation that you wished to take through on a partisan, we've got more votes than you have sort of basis. I was very keen indeed that by the time we got to the final vote on the floor of the Assembly, that we would have the broadest possible consensus across the floor, and there were significant numbers of Conservative members of the Assembly who on a party basis didn't have a commitment, but who were allowed a free vote in the final vote, who supported the legislation in its final form. Inevitably, that meant quite a lot of crafting of some compromises around some aspects of it, but given the nature of the legislation, I felt that was more important than simply using the weight of government numbers to move the legislation through the process.
Thank you. You commented at what you said in relation to the opting out. You said where somebody has done nothing. At the point of donation, if deemed, always asked if further information of the person's views are known by the family. And you also subsequently talked about a representative potentially being appointed. I'm interested to know who will arbitrate and make the decision ultimately as to whether or not the transplant is to proceed.
If there is a representative appointed, that person has primacy, and that person will represent the potential donor's views. And even if the family were to entirely disagree, it's clear in the law with us that if you appointed a representative, that person's view will prevail. So there is room for discussion always. There's room for different views to be contributed. But if you have taken the trouble to appoint a representative, then that person's view in the end will be the view that prevails.
But to whom is what I'm trying to establish. To whom does the representative express the view of the donor? And if it's the family and they are being asked for these additional views, by whom are they being asked for these additional views, and who would then make the decision?
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get that point originally. The views are being expressed to the clinical team whose responsibility it is to explore the possibility of donation. And just as in Scotland, the clinical team essentially in Wales is represented by the specialist nurse in organ donation. So this is the person who will be dealing with this issue all the time, who is particularly trained in eliciting views from the family, trying to explain to them what the decision would involve. So the discussion happens with a clinical team, and it's the clinical team who would be allowing the family to express their views, and if there is a representative, are responsible for obtaining the view of the representative as well.
Okay, thank you. And that kind of leads to where I want to kind of end up in a couple of questions. One is, How does anyone who wishes to opt out, what different opportunities are there for them to register that opt-out? And I suppose the concern I've had as health spokesman, and having been broadly sympathetic, is my confidence in systems. I mean, everybody remembers the dreadful scare in Liverpool where it turned out that children's tissue had been kept and nobody had known anything about it. There is such a wholly positive attitude underpinning the current system, and levels of registration are increasing. All this turns really on the system that we have put in place to record people's wishes being thoroughly robust, and the concern that were it to transpire otherwise after the event, that an individual's wishes had not then been respected, and the potential way in which, frankly, the media and others might exploit that into something of a national scandal which could have a prejudicial effect on the whole system. It's that concern I have. So how certain are you about the robustness of the views of individuals being respected? Because they could make the decision to opt out years in advance of, hopefully, of course, years in advance of the situation ever arising where that would then have to be considered. And they may never have thought to go back to check to see what the current status of their wishes as recorded now is.
Well, I think there's a really important point, and the issue of reputational risk and reputational damage to the system were organ donation to go ahead in circumstances where the donor clearly didn't wish it to happen, or vice versa, have preoccupied us during the whole process of the bill. I say to people who ask me in Wales that opting out will be absolutely as easy as opting in. It will not be made more difficult or in anything like that. And we will make sure that anybody who wants to opt out can do it as easily as anybody wanting to opt in is able to do it. So people will be able to do it at GP surgeries, they will be able to do it by visiting the internet site and so on. It will be a very straightforward way of doing it. But the safeguard in our system comes through the role of the family, because donation cannot go ahead without the involvement of the family. So if it were the case, as you suggested, that many years before somebody had recorded themselves, let us say, as being in favour of organ donation, so on the register they have opted in, but over the years that have followed they've changed their minds, they've come to a different view. If the family is able to say to the clinical team, even though that person is on the register as being in favour of organ donation, we know that their views had changed and they would not wish to be a donor, then the family's view would prevail. So the safeguard comes by having that discussion at the point where a decision has to be made. We won't rely simply and solely on the register, even though we are confident that the register itself will be as friendly to users as it can be and as accurate as it possibly can be too.
Thank you, Minister. Essentially then, in order to secure public confidence, you've gone for little brother rather than big brother, if I can call it that way, in terms of the way it would be judged.
We had a very lively debate about the role of the family, and one of the amendments that the government made to the bill during its passage was to make it clear on the face of the bill that the family had this right and this role to play. But I hope I've made it clear already, but just to be completely clear about it, what the family are asked to do is to represent the known views of the donor, not their own views.
Stand that. Can I just ask finally, because there's just one thought that's occurred to me, what happens where there isn't a family?
Where people have no family, if they have appointed a representative, then the donation is able to go ahead in those circumstances. But if somebody dies and no family member can be found, then donation will not go ahead. Now, we've had debate about that as well, because someone might have opted in and put their name on the register. But without a family member there, there are other issues, as well as issues simply of consent that the clinical team have to pursue with the family. Issues of medical history, issues to know whether the person is in fact in a proper clinical condition to be a donor, and so on. So, from the empirical evidence we have, we know that these are going to be very, very rare circumstances. But in order to protect the integrity of the system, our decision has been that if a person has no family and no representative, then donation will not proceed in those circumstances.
If I could just add something as well. In a deemed consent system, such as the one that we are going to have, the family is required also to confirm other kinds of details. So, it wouldn't be right to deem a person's consent unless you could be sure that they were ordinarily resident in Wales. That's one of the conditions. And there will be other things to check as well, as the Minister has indicated. So this is part of the reason why we say that families or friends of long-standing should be present and be able to be there to provide or confirm those details.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Ms Vernon. Clearly, the introduction of your opt-out system in Wales will result in two different registers operating within the UK. Now, Ms Vernon has just touched on the issue with regard to Welsh residents. Can you tell the committee what steps have been taken to address any potential problems that may arise from maintaining two registers?
Mr MacDonald, in fact, there will still be just one register for the whole of the United Kingdom, because we have now secured agreement between the four nations that will be the case. There is to be a new register, and that new register will allow the recording of opt-out decisions and of appointed representative decisions. So it will be a new register, but it will be a single common UK register, and that agreement is now secured, and the funding has been secured as well to make sure that it will be in place.
Okay, that's fine, thanks.
Thank you for that. David Torrance.
Thank you.
Good morning, Minister. Can you tell us what measures are in place to engage with the public to raise awareness of a change that will allow people to make an informed decision?
Yes, thank you for that question. As I said, we have a 2-year period of information and education. Essentially, it's going to operate in two main ways. We have a sort of mass campaign designed to make sure that the ordinary citizen who wishes to be informed about the new system will have every opportunity to do so. And we're exploring a whole range of different ways in which we can make sure that that information gets to somebody who wants to be informed. And that involves TV advertising and newspaper advertising. It involves information at GP surgeries using our primary care community to help us there. It will involve a letter setting out the whole new system, going by post to every single citizen who is resident in Wales as we lead into the system. But the second and allied thing we will do is we will run some more targeted information campaigns at groups of people who we think we have to do that bit extra to make sure that they are informed. So I've mentioned faith groups already, but we will do a similar sort of job with young people as they become 16, 17, and as they lead into being 18, because they will not be capable of having their consent deemed until they are 18 in Wales, so we need to make sure that they understand the position they will be in. We will do a particular job of work on students, for example, who come and live in Wales to study. They must be here for 12 months before they fall within the ambit of deemed consent. So we will use the first year that they come to study in Wales through our universities to make sure that they get an extra level of information. So it's a dual campaign, a mass campaign for the ordinary citizen, and then special action to make sure we reach those groups who we think we have to make an extra effort to reach.
Thank you, Minister. One of the groups I'm interested in is the group that have difficulty with reading and writing. How are you going to engage with them?
Well, thank you. That is a very interesting point, and we've had lots of discussion during the passage of the bill on the issue of capacity. How do we make sure that nobody is brought within the deemed consent regime who doesn't have the mental capacity to understand the choices that they have? And the bill has various mechanisms to respond to that. We will be making particular efforts to reach people who have communication issues. And that isn't just in relation to reading and writing. Our general campaign is pitched at a level where you would expect most people to be able to understand it. But, we have people who have hearing problems, deaf and hard of hearing problems, for example. We're lucky in Wales. We have a very vibrant third sector organisation around health in particular. And we will be working with our third sector partners to make sure that we do that extra bit of activity to reach groups of people who may find it more difficult to get the information they need through normal channels. And that will include people in the circumstances that you described.
Thank you.
Dick Brodie?
Yes, sorry, if I may come in just the back of that, Minister. In what some may regret is a celebrity-driven society, noting your mass campaign, which seems extremely thorough, in raising the profile, have you used well-known Welsh celebrities to get the message over?
We do. The Welsh Kidney Society has long been a sort of leading advocate of the change in the law here, and they have always used prominent figures in Welsh public life to persuade people of the need for donation. So Lee Halfpenny, who you will have heard of, I guess, is currently one of the people who is most prominently associated with promoting organ donation in Wales. So the Welsh Rugby Union has been a very powerful partner in all of this, but we also use other celebrities. Catherine Jenkins, for example, has been an active participant in the Kidney Wales campaign. So we do use people who will be better known than me, that's for sure, in the public mind to get the message over.
Interesting, thank you.
Well,
sorry, Ms. Allen.
One thing that we have found extremely powerful, though, is the use of real-life case studies. So we've got a very good bank now of case studies that we've built up, and those people are very happy to sort of talk to the media about their own experiences, etc. So sort of a combination, really, of celebrity, well-known people, but people who've actually got real experience of this area as well, can be a very powerful combination.
Thank you.
Okay. Anne McTaggart.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Minister. Good morning, Ms Vernon. I've been left to ask the financial aspects of the bill, to explore what costs of implementing the new system is estimated to be, and how this will be monitored.
Thank you. There is a cost involved with the introduction of the new system. We have £7.5 million set aside in Welsh Government budgets over the coming years, and that's to support a range of different activities. It supports the education and information campaigns that we've been exploring, but it also supports a new training set of packages for specialist nurses and other clinicians to make sure that they are fully conversant with the new system. At one extra donation a month, which is more or less what we expect the new system to bring about, we don't think that this will have a major impact on the critical care capacity of the Welsh NHS, but we do have a new critical care plan for Wales that sits alongside the Act. And, you know, I recognise that some of that 7.5 million will be needed to improve some of our critical care capacity to be able to respond to the new level of donation. Once the system is up and running, then I think all the evidence we have shows that if we were able to secure just 2 more donations in Wales, that the system will pay for itself. Because the cost of kidney dialysis is very significant indeed. And if you are able to bring just 2 more people off dialysis and through transplantation into what is a far better quality of life for them, then the extra costs of running the system will be paid back. So the system, although there's an investment up front to bring it all about, once it's happening, the system will pay for itself and probably more than that.
Thank you, Minister. Can I ask, there would be cost up front, but would that have implications on any other initiatives before you do feel the benefits at the other end?
Well, in the circumstances that we are all in, you know, at the moment, where any spending decision is inevitably a decision also not to spend money on something else. If that's the question you're making, are we having to make choices here to give this priority over something else? The answer is inevitably yes, because that's just the financial circumstances we are in. But as I say, it's our belief that this investment is worthwhile because over the longer run, it will not just pay for itself, but it will lead to such improvement in the quality of lives of people who will be affected by it. And could I just say, absolutely rightly, the discussion today reflects the discussion that was had in the National Assembly during the passage of the bill, where we focus very much on the person making the donation and making sure that the Act fully protects their position and has the necessary safeguards to make sure that people within a deemed consent regime understand the decision they are making. But I tried regularly to remind members of the Assembly that there is another very significant audience here, and that is the people waiting for donation. We have over 200 people on the organ donor waiting list here in Wales. I visited myself a kidney dialysis unit in Cardiff in the immediate run-up to the final debates on the floor of the Assembly, and it's very powerful testimony indeed when you are sitting next door to somebody who says to you, I have been on the waiting list for 3 years. Every day I wake up and think to myself, that's 1 day less I have in which this miracle could be performed for me. And part of the act of persuasion that we had to make with some Assembly members and with faith groups and so on was to make sure that people who've benefited from donation or who are waiting for donation came to the Assembly to tell their stories too.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
John Wilson.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Ms Vernon. Just to tease out the answers that you gave to Jackson Carnlow, the role of the family is crucial here in relation to either the opt-in or the deemed consent issues. Now, you raised an issue where somebody who may have opted in, but in later years the family then passes on sometime after they've opted in, and the family then come back and say the person's wishes had changed. They no longer wanted to opt in. And the family were insistent that the individual no longer wanted their organs used. In those circumstances, now you mentioned the issue about the appointed representative. Where does the appointed representative's views stand in relation to the family's views, in relation to the wishes of the individual, and in many cases the deceased individual?
Yes. If someone has appointed a representative and the representative's account of the person's views would differ from the family's, then the representative's views prevail. That's absolutely clear in our legislation. If you have taken the trouble to appoint a representative, then that is the person whose view will determine the outcome, even when that view is different to that of the family. Because it's to go back to the very first set of questions, it is in order to make sure that if you are fearful that your family may not faithfully represent your views, or that your family may have a different set of views to your own, and you want to make certain that it is your views that matter at the point when a decision is made, those are the circumstances in which a representative will be appointed. And that's why it's important that in those circumstances, it's the representative, the person you have gone out of your way to appoint to represent your views, that it is their contribution which is the one that prevails.
In relation to appointed representatives, will there be a register of appointed representatives that individuals will be able to choose from? Because one of the issues for me is that if someone does opt in, appoints a representative, an appointed representative, but the eventual donation takes place 5, 10, 20 years down the road, how do we weigh the role of the individual's decision 20 years ago compared to the time that the donations may be made?
Well, that is a very important point, Mr. Wilson, to think through. I think what the conclusion I came to, and I think most people came to as the bill made its way through the Assembly, is that you cannot legislate for every contingency. And there may well be circumstances in the future where if someone appoints a representative, that person's name is recorded on the register. So that's how you know who the person is. But indeed, years may elapse, and that might have been a person you knew very well 20 years earlier, but things have moved on. It is why, in the end, in these unusual and probably complex circumstances, it's still the clinical team who have to exercise their judgment. Just because something is legal does not mean that it has to happen. And if a clinical team felt that there was such an ambiguity about someone's wishes to be a donor, then they have to take account of a point that I think one of your colleagues made earlier, that you would not want to act in a way that causes a reputational risk to the system as a whole. And therefore, there will always be the discretion available to the clinical team in those circumstances to decide that, given what we know here, given the length of time that has elapsed and so on, we are not confident the donation should go ahead.
Right.
I think it's a very... Yeah, sorry. It's a very particular scale, as the Minister has just alluded to, of the specialist nurse and other members of the clinical team to try to work their way around potential conflicts or disagreements and using the information that they have got. But as we say, it isn't necessarily the case that just because something is lawful that it would actually make it inevitable. So, the donation may not go ahead for a number of different reasons, but that's part of the skill of the team to sort of work that out. And will also be covered to an extent in the code of practice, which will be developed to underpin the legislation.
Thank you, Ms Vernon, for that clarification. The issue is really when someone opts in, they name an appointed representative. That appointed representative may predecease the individual or may no longer be a friend or an associate of the individual who opted in. And it's whether or not, as Ms Vernon has indicated, the clinical team actually supersedes the wishes of the family in circumstances where the appointed representative is no longer available to be engaged in that discussion.
In the end, the clinical team has to have the discretion to make a decision in those circumstances. And there are a series of contingencies, as I say, which you can't in law anticipate every possible set of circumstances, which is why we continue to make it clear in our legislation, as Pat has said, that because something is lawful, it isn't inevitable, and there is a discretion, a residual discretion, that the clinical team will always have to deal with those unusual sets of circumstances.
Thank you, Minister. My final question relates to a campaign that ran in the 1980s, and I'm not sure if the Minister was aware of the campaign when organ donors were being sought at that time. Cards were issued, and the campaign centred around ensuring that organ donations only stayed within the NHS and were not used within the private sector. And I know that in my organ donor card from the 1980s it says NHS only. Could the Minister give any indication whether there was discussions when you were putting through the legislation in Wales to ensure that those who opt in can opt in only to ensure that the NHS benefits from these organs and that these organs aren't then transferred to those patients receiving private treatment? And I know the Minister made reference to kidney transplants, but the body parts are now used for a number of different areas of medical development. And could the Minister clarify whether or not there is an opt-in clause that allows individuals to state they only want those organs used for the NHS?
The system in future will be the same as the system now in that regard. Mr Wilson, as you know, if you opt in now, you are able to make a series of subsidiary choices because, as you say, a very wide range of organs can potentially be used for donation, and you don't have to commit, even if you opt in, to making all those organs available. Many people, for example, choose not to allow their eyes to be used in future, even when they're quite happy for every other organ to be used. So being able to restrict the use of your organs to the NHS will be available in future as it's available now. The debate in Wales actually was more about making it clear that additional organs that may become available through the Welsh NHS will continue to be available in any part of the United Kingdom NHS system.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister.
Thank you. I'm conscious, I would like this to continue, but I'm conscious we're running a bit out of time. Perhaps just a very final quick point. Did you make any reference in the legislation or during the debate in the Welsh Assembly about the role of effectively a living will, where you identify in the will that you wish to have your organs donated, and also that you want to name the representative in the will as well? Was that discussed at all in the debate in the Welsh Assembly?
I don't recall it being raised directly. Pat is just going to check to see if there is anything specific that I've forgotten. Our debate centred more around making sure that the ability to appoint a representative was made as straightforward as possible and advertised as widely as possible within the organ donation system itself.
I mean, the legislation does provide for a person to make arrangements orally or in writing, for example, to appoint a representative, but it doesn't specify how that should be done. So I would imagine that you could include a living will within those sorts of arrangements. But I mean, with regard to organ donation, at the end of the day, it will come down to whether or not that information is accessible at the time that it's needed. So we wouldn't encourage people to sort of put these wishes somewhere where nobody would ever know about them if the time ever came that they were in a position to donate their organs. So it's that this is why part of our communications campaign really encourages people to talk about their organ donation decision. In the same way, I think there's the Scottish Government has had this WeChat a sort of campaign as well. Similarly, that's what we want, not to sort of hide away decisions in an inaccessible place.
And you've said that you've had 15 additional donations in terms of organs?
No, Mr. Stewart, that's what we anticipate. In the work that we have to do when we produce a bill, the regulatory impact assessment, we have to say how many extra donations we anticipate will come about in Wales as a result of moving to a deemed consent. One of the things that surprises people, the ordinary citizen, is just how few donations there are. When I say to people, give me a guess then, how many people do you think made a donation in Wales last year? They overestimate the number many, many times. So when I say, well, actually, it was only 63, and we're hoping for 15 more, I think that often takes people's breath away, really, that we're talking about such a modest number.
Since the I mean, obviously there's not been a lot of time since the legislation has gone through. How many additional donations have you had since the legislation has been passed?
Well, the legislation doesn't go live until the 1st of December 2015 in order to allow for this period of education and so on. But we are aware that just the whole business of raising the profile of the issue, having it discussed in the media and amongst people themselves, is already having an impact on people's decision-making, but it is too early to give you figures, I think, at this point.
So even though the legislation obviously isn't enforced, the fact you've raised awareness will help in terms of potential donations, even up to 15. Right. Thank you for that.
Yes.
If you've got a couple of minutes just to be with us, we're now going to the summation where we're deciding what the next steps are. I mean, I'm sure I speak for the committee to say I think your evidence was excellent, so thank you very much for giving up your time. My own view on this is clearly this is something, it's a very, very important petition that we need to be very active in the next steps. And my own view is that I think the level of this petition does merit having a debate in Parliament, a specific debate, what we call a plenary session. So we have to make a bid through the conveners group for that. And we've done that 2 or 3 times over the last couple of years. But as always, it's a matter for the whole committee. And I would first of all want to ask the committee if they share my view that we at least ask for a plenary session on this in a session of Parliament in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're agreed, and we'll make arrangements to put a bid in for that in due course. Can I ask committee members then whether they see further steps necessary that we haven't already covered?
No, can I just, Convener, I think, and thank you, Minister and Ms Vernon, for an extremely interesting and informative session. I don't know what communication you have with the Scottish Government on this, and we are clearly interested in the evaluation once the thing goes live. I don't know if you have that communication, but certainly we should continue to maintain the profile, and I agree with the suggestion that we seek a plenary session to discuss this issue.
Thank you for that, Mr Brody. Any other comments? Angus MacDonald?
Thanks, Convener. As we have just heard from the Minister, the soft opt-out system won't be introduced in Wales until December 2015, so presumably we'll not have an evaluation of the situation in Wales until late 16, possibly even 2017. So, given the Minister's comments that I think it was 2 more donations in Wales would cover the extra cost of the running the system, and as we've just heard again, an extra 15 are anticipated, the system will pay for itself. It may be time to encourage the Scottish Government to move faster on the issue, and clearly a plenary session may well help to do that.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Mr MacDonald. Any other comments from members? Well, can I thank you again, Minister and Mr Vernon, for coming along and giving up your valuable time. It's an excellent session. It's really helped us understand the issue, and I think there's so many good ideas from your potential legislation that we need to incorporate here in Scotland. So thanks very much for coming along, and we'll keep you up to date with our developments. And I'll suspend for 2 minutes to allow our video conference to cease and for our new witnesses to take their place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well.
Good luck at the weekend.
No, thank you.
If I could restart our committee, we're on agenda item 2, consideration of a new petition. So the next item of business is consideration of one new petition, and as previously agreed by the committee, we'll take evidence from the petitioner. The petition is PE 1504 by Catherine McLean Tormar on party litigants, civil appeals to the Supreme Court. Members have a note by the clerk, the spice briefing on the petition. Could I welcome the petitioner and Gordon McLean to the meeting? And could I invite Ms McLean Tormar to make a short presentation of around 5 minutes to set the context for the petition, after which I'll start with some questions and then I'll ask my colleagues to ask some additional.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you understand that this petition is not just about me, but a gross imbalance in the law regarding all persons in Scotland who find themselves in the position of a party litigant, i.e. someone who has to represent themselves in court. And we are lucky enough to live in a democratic society where this is possible. In paragraph 1.8 of appeals from the Court of Session, Scotland to the Supreme Court, it states, as I have said in my petition, that although at the moment permission to appeal does not require an interlocutor from the inner house at the Court of Session, but the appeal must be signed by 2 Scottish counsel, and this is where the flaw is. A party litigant, as we all know, is a person who represents themselves. This can be for whatever reason, maybe lack of funds for a solicitor, but more so nowadays, lack of funding for solicitors from the Legal Aid Board. Having seen for myself the solicitors demonstrating about this issue, so we will have a situation where more and more people will be forced to represent themselves in the court. When a party litigant represents themselves in the Court of Session and loses their case, then appeals and loses that. I might add there are no statistics as to how many party litigants have ever won a case in the Court of Session. I learned this via a Freedom of Information request. They are also then denied the right to appeal to the Supreme Court, which, according to the European Court of Human Rights, is deemed to be the highest court of the land, i.e. United Kingdom. See Frequently Asked Questions 26 at echr.com. where it states that you must have taken your case to the highest court of the land, so you can then apply to the European Court of Human Rights to put your case to them. The fact is that you've been denied your human rights, which in this case is Article 6, Inequality of Arms. Everyone deserves a fair hearing. We should be on the same playing field and not the haves and have not of society. Party litigants lose their right to appeal because of paragraph 1.8, where it states that 2 Scottish counsel must sign their appeal. Well, here all party litigants will experience the fact that they cannot approach Scottish counsel, not in their chambers, not at the Court of Session, and certainly not at the Advocates' Library. The only way to approach counsel is via a solicitor. This is where an even larger difficulty lies. A solicitor is then put into a position where he or she only has 42 days to read a case, which might have gone on for many, many years. Then speak to 2 counsel and have them read the case, print their opinion, and apply for the appeal to the Supreme Court. Whilst in theory this would hopefully happen, in practice it cannot and does not happen. First of all, legal aid would have to be applied for, which takes time. Then if it was granted, the solicitor could contact counsel. And if I say, if granted, please take into consideration the cuts in the legal aid. But the real problem is that solicitors are wary of coming into a case at this very late stage. As part of my research, I obtained a list of 38 solicitors via the recommendations of the Law Society of Scotland. Having telephoned all 38 with this scenario, not one of them would be willing to take on a Herculean task. Many stated conflict of interest, lack of funding, too many hurdles to pass, and last but not least of all, the fact that the pursuer of the appeal has been a party litigant, and the legalities of this are a minefield, and not one that a solicitor would like to enter into. It is not the solicitor's fault, but the fault of paragraph 1.8 that denies party litigants their rights. I would also like to add that the Faculty of Advocates, in their response to the consultation of the Courts Reform Bill on paragraph 6 state, and I quote, that they know that party litigants have difficulty in obtaining signatures from counsel. However, it has become increasingly burdensome as the number of cases has been increasing between 2005 and 2010. They received 5 5 requests in 5 years from party litigants. The definition of burdensome is heavy, onerous, troublesome and hard to deal with. So, as we can deduce, party litigants are not highly thought of by the faculty. I am still waiting for my Freedom of Information request from the faculty as to how many party litigants they have helped to appeal to the Supreme Court. But having contacted the Supreme Court, I already know the answer. Not one party litigant from Scotland has ever been granted the right to appeal to the Supreme Court, and therefore they do not meet the criteria for an appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. Not only does paragraph 1.8 deny a party litigant the right to appeal to the Supreme Court, but also to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, which is a blatant human rights issue. The theory is there, but as I state, the practicalities deny a party litigant the right of appeal. Everyone must be treated equally with fairness and respect. The current situation contradicts the Act very severely. This is a flaw in Scottish justice. The system in place at the moment is not fit for purpose. It places insurmountable barriers to the party litigant. The same happens in any civil case where civil appeals by party litigants have less rights. The Scottish Government has now clearly recognised there is a problem here. Mr McCaskill, I believe, has mentioned this in the Court Reform Bill, but nowhere are the 2 words party litigant, and therefore I believe that my petition could only serve to support any further planned measures to bring relief to such cases. Therefore, I feel it is the interest of justice and of all party litigants that my petition is looked at by yourselves.
Thank you very much. And when we're asking questions, obviously I encourage if Mr McLean wants to ask any questions, well, please just catch my eye and we'll be happy to take you in. I think you probably covered my first question, but just for the record, the 2 council rule which you mentioned, which seems to be crucial to this, are you arguing then that this is a breach of Article 6 of the CHR, which has the right to a fair hearing?
I'm saying that a party litigant does not have the right to approach counsel, which is a breach of the Inequality of Arms, Article 6. So it is a breach of your human rights because a party litigant cannot directly go to counsel. They must go via a solicitor.
Thank you for that. And the second question I have is about, obviously, future legislation. Obviously, the Courts Reform Bill, you did make some hints on that. Is being proposed by government and will be going through Justice Committee and so on. My understanding of this, then, that would take away the 2 council role and would really be a matter for the Inner House to decide whether there's grounds to go eventually to the Supreme Court. What's your view on that assessment of that? If this legislation went through, would this solve your problem?
No, no, it wouldn't, because it doesn't say anywhere. I believe it was put in on the 6th of February, but it doesn't say anywhere about party litigants. It doesn't include party litigants at all. And I think that is a gross problem. The 2 words party litigants are not in the Reform Bill, and is this going to be a big umbrella and everyone's going to be under it, or is this going to be for people that are legally represented? And that's the problem. If you're not legally represented, how can you go to the Inner House?
Right.
Which is what is proposed.
Right. So you're arguing then that this new legislation wouldn't solve your problem?
It wouldn't cover party litigants at all.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. I'll start with Chick Brodie.
Yes, if I may just follow on. First of all, Convener, I get, we've had several of these, and this is a general point, and perhaps not just for the Petitions Committee. I get very concerned about trying to get information out of the legal system in Scotland. And when I look at the approaches that have been made with hardly any replies, then I just wonder what on earth is going on and how our legal system is being administered. People at least have the decency, or should have the decency, of a reply, whether that's from the Lord President, the Cabinet Secretary, or what have you. I'll make that point and I'll leave it lying there. I wonder if we can... good morning, by the way. just ask about the change in terms of how you foresee the ability as proposed to approach the faculty of advocates as opposed to having two solicitors approve the appeal to the Inner House.
What it is that at the moment a party litigant would have to get 2 signatures from Scottish Council, and that's where the problem is. You can't approach Council, you can't speak to them, you can't go to the Court of Session and speak to them, you can't phone them up. They will have nothing to do with you whatsoever. You must go to a solicitor who will then go on your behalf to the Council.
Sorry to interrupt, just stop you there. In the petition, you say that only a solicitor, and in fact only a solicitor practising in Edinburgh.
Yes, that's another problem.
Where's the evidence for that?
I think there is actually a solicitor from Glasgow who has also put a petition in quite a few months ago, I believe, where they laid a problem that a Glasgow solicitor has to instruct an Edinburgh solicitor to be able to go to the Court of Session. That's my understanding, and that's the way it was explained to me. I did go to a Glasgow solicitor who actually told me that. Unless they have the, I think you call it the right of audience to do that themselves.
I find that, if that is the case,
yes,
most disconcerting. I just, one last question. I don't want to go, we can't go into your particular detail, but clearly I'd like to ask you, do you agree that there has to be some filtering out of the number of cases that might approach the Inner House? Have you any, other than the two solicitor rule, have you any idea how that might be improved? Or that might be performed?
At the moment, because we don't know how long it will take for the court reform bill to go through. So at the moment, if it could be changed that a party litigant who has gone through the Court of Session, who has appealed and lost their appeal, would then have the right to directly go to counsel. It might be argued that there is a thing called the FLSU, which is the Free Legal Services Unit. You can go to various agencies and ask them to make an application to the Free Legal Services Unit, which is run by certain advocates. It's like a pro bono thing. But they are only allowed to give you 3 days. In many, many cases that have taken years to go through the Court of Session, 3 days is not enough. It takes more than 3 days to read the case, more than 3 days to do research, and so that part, which could be argued about the Free Legal Service Unit, actually doesn't cover a party litigant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. Other colleagues wish to raise questions or points? Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Convener. I'd just like to say that I appreciate the petitioner bringing these anomalies to the Parliament's attention. It does seem to me to be unfair that party litigants can only approach counsel through a solicitor, which kind of defeats the purpose and the right of an individual to represent themselves. I also have to agree with the petitioner that the 42-day period for filing a notice of appeal does seem excessively short, and you didn't really touch on that in your preamble. However, it has been noted that the Court Reform Bill does seek to introduce leave to appeal rather than a requirement for two counsel to certify appeals. However, it's my understanding that there doesn't seem to be any intention in the bill to increase the 42-day period for filing a notice of appeal. However, I could be wrong. Clearly, you would wish to see that period increased.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
If possible.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Convener.
Do any other members wish to offer a point? I had just a couple of points that we, as you probably know, we get a briefing from our information service for every single petition. There was 2 points that I just wanted to raise with you. And what Spice are telling us is that, and I'll just quote this if I may, that the treatment of civil appeals from the Court of Session, the Faculty of Advocates suggests that party litigants can approach the faculty direct for assistance in this regard. Do you have any comments on that quote?
I have tried myself, and I know of 3 other party litigants who have also tried to address the Faculty of Advocates. They do not reply. I have a Freedom of Information request at the moment, which was sent 8 weeks ago, and I haven't had a reply for this same thing. The Faculty of Advocates find, as they say in their consultation, they find party litigants burdensome. They have said that, I have it in print. They find us burdensome. That is shocking. That is not being on the same playing field.
Sure.
Everyone having the right.
So
it doesn't work.
Is it reasonable to say then there's still an outstanding issue around the Faculty of Advocates? Because if what we are picking up is they're offering to provide some help and advice, but you're saying that you found it difficult to get a response.
They don't. Okay. This is where the Free Legal Services Unit comes in, which the Faculty of Advocates run for pro bono. But you have the problem there where you have to find an agency, which could be Strathclyde Law Clinic, it could be Citizens Advice Bureau. They will make the application to the Free Legal Services Unit at the Advocates Library, and then somebody will read it and say yes or no. But you only can have 3 days. So perhaps they take 1 day to read it, 1 day to do a bit of research. So when are they going to stand in court and do the proof for you? There is no time. And I hate to say this, but I feel the Faculty of Advocates are it's just window dressing. They don't address the problem. They don't come back with freedom of information. I made a freedom of information request to the Supreme Court in London, and they told me not one party litigant from Scotland has ever been able to appeal. Not one. Why?
The other issue I would just like to raise as well is that the general comments that we're getting through our information, and I'm not putting words in the mouth of our information service, is that advocates won't sign, or the 2 councils that we referred to won't sign unless there's an issue in law that they feel is valid to go to the next stage. That's the general legal... I mean, would you first of all accept that is the summary of where we are in the law?
Well, a party litigant, the majority of party litigants, the average time that they've been a party litigant is 11 years. And I think that they would have a point in law because they wouldn't have kept going for over 11 years. And their cases would have been thrown out of the court. So on the points of law, it is up to the party litigant to put forward the points of law to the advocate. And that's not done lightly. But you're not paying. You're not paying for that advocate for the council. Right. And I think money really speaks.
Ms McLean, do you have anything to add at this point?
No.
Right.
Might I add something?
Sure, certainly.
When I approached Lord Gill, he simply sent a letter from his secretary telling me to go to www.supremecourt.com. I didn't ask for legal advice. I didn't ask any unusual questions. I just asked about paragraph 1.8, and he wouldn't answer me. And everybody I've asked in the legal system has told me to go to paragraph 1.8.
Well, thank you for that. Our next step, and we wish you to stay in for this section, but we've come to the end of the questions, is looking how we deal with your petition. Clearly, you've raised a lot of very interesting points and a real frustration from party litigants, particularly getting to the Supreme Court and using ECHR. I mean, the key for us, normally as a committee, we would obviously want to go as far as we can with each petition. There are some exceptions, and that's where another committee is looking at relevant legislation. And as you know, the Justice Committee is looking at the issue of the Courts Reform Bill. So in normal circumstances, and I think this would fit into that, it would make a lot of sense for us to refer the petition to the committee that's actually doing the active work, which is looking at, does this new legislation help you or not? And so my advice to the committee is that we would actually refer this petition as soon as possible to Justice Committee so they can look at the, as long as the merits of the bill, they can look at the issues raised by the petitioner, which I think raises quite a lot of questions, and I would be pleased if our colleagues in Justice could have a look at that. But clearly it's a matter for the whole committee. Can I first of all ask the committee of their views?
I agree, Convener. However, sometimes we forget, and the extension of us forget, why we're here. And that is to respond to people who have genuine issues. I fail to understand why those that be are not responding, at least with some degree of courtesy. And from a personal point of view, I find that wholly unacceptable that information is not being provided, or even the courtesy of a letter. So I hope the message goes from here, whether we do it formally or not, that we're here to represent whether the right petitioners are right or wrong, and they should be treated with that courtesy, no matter where it is in government. And clearly, some of the answers, or no answers, that have been received in this case, frankly, in my opinion, are wholly unacceptable.
I think Mr Brodie makes an excellent point. Other colleagues? Do members of the committee agree with the recommendation that we move to refer this to the Justice Committee? Are there any other further points that we need to make a note of at this stage? So as you can hear, we're obviously very keen to make sure that the committee who's got this active focus on this legislation looks at not just the legislation but your petition as well. So we'll make arrangements for this to be transferred immediately to Justice Committee, and they will obviously keep you up to date with the petition. So the petition is still active within the Scottish Parliament. It's just going to the appropriate committee that's considering the legislation.
Add something.
Sure.
I did go to my MSP, which is Michael Russell, who informed me that he had spoken to Kenny MacAskill, and Kenny MacAskill said that when Scotland gets independence, they will change the law.
Right.
I just wanted that.
That's slightly beyond my pay grade, but
exactly, yes.
Mr Russell's very entitled to his comments. But as far as what we can do within the Petitions Committee, I do think you've raised that. Mr Carlow?
Was this communicated to you in writing?
Well, my husband was there. We had.
Do you have it in written confirmation?
Oh, no. No.
I think it'd be very interesting if you were able to obtain that commitment in writing and share it with the committee.
Right. So thank you, Mr Carlow. This petition is still active. It's going to the Justice Committee, and our colleagues in Justice will take on board the consideration of the bill and your petition. Thank you for raising that with us. You've raised some very worrying points there, and I hope the Justice Committee are able to look at this in a lot of detail. Thank you for coming along and giving evidence, and I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow our witnesses to leave.
Very much. Thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you.
Restart our committee. We are now on PE 1319 by William Smith and Scott Robertson on improving youth football in Scotland. Members have a note by the clerk and the submissions. I would also register the fact that Ian Graysby has been very interested in this petition. He can't be here today, but he's expressed his support for it. And as always, can members note my registration of interests as a trustee of Inverness Caledonian Thistle Football Club. And I think this has been. I think members in the past have expressed a very strong interest in this petition. It raises issues, I think, that go beyond an interest in football. It's also about the employment of young people, and there is issues as well about fair treatment directives and the rights of the child, which I know the Children's Commissioner have looked at. This has been discussed in the past when we've had roundtable events. Obviously, I'll throw it open for discussion from members, but my own view is I think it would make a lot of sense to have another roundtable discussion on the issue of training compensation for young players, and there's obviously a list of suggested people that could be included. But just to flag up, that's my particular interest in it. Can I throw it open to then members for contribution points? Chick Brody?
Based on your experience, Convener, it's interesting to see what action has been taken, but I don't believe the action that has been taken addresses all of the points that were raised in the petition. You know, we were talking about training arrangements, but we were talking a much wider remit within the petition, which was entering in contracts with children under 16, social, educational, psychological effects, the effect of compensation payments between member clubs, increasing the educational target. You know, there are about 6 items that were raised by the petitioner, and while we welcome the training compensation issue that's been addressed by the SFA and the SFL, I don't feel that is a comprehensive and total response to what was raised in the petition. So I support the round table. I also support the recommendation that we seek representatives of clubs other than the 2 large Glasgow clubs, so that we understand what's actually happening near to the ground in terms of activity and how it is perceived by those lesser clubs that are not necessarily in the Premier Division, because I think that's really where the impact will be felt.
Thank you for that. John Wilson, did you have any point to add on this?
Not really, Convener. Just to say that I think we have come to the stage where another round table would be an interesting discussion, because I think the SFA and SPL, because of the changes that have taken place since we first considered this petition, I think it would be useful just to try and get an update at the present time on where they're going to, and particularly in relation to the working group that was set up to look at this issue. And I think you're right, Convener, this has been a petition that's been ongoing for a number of years and has, I think, achieved cross-party support to try and get to the bottom of the issue, and particularly get to resolve the situation that young teenagers find themselves in when they are being denied the opportunity to play football for a club that was not the original club they signed up with. And I think the round table would give us that opportunity to find out whether or not we are getting significant movement from the professional football game to actually ensure that we actually allow young people to play football and not be effectively debarred from playing football or prohibited because of the financial constraints that some clubs are placing on other clubs to allow them to play.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And in fairness, I'm not suggesting that there's been no action. And I know particularly at Campbell Ogilvie, this Scottish FA president, has formed a working party, and I know he's got a great interest in this particular area. But nevertheless, I think there's still some outstanding issues. That's why I thought the round table would be useful. David Torrance?
I'm happy to go along with the round table, but I've got to make a declaration of interest as a member of Raith Rovers Trust on this subject.
Anne McTaggart, do you have any?
We'll certainly agree to the round table, of which we will benefit.
Yeah, I certainly agree that the round table is a good idea. However, a note from the list of attendees that well, I note that in the submission from Real Grassroots, they've suggested that Neil Doncaster, the CEO of SPFL, should be included in the round table. However, I don't see him on the suggested list.
Yeah, that would make sense to include a key player. Yeah. Jackson Carlo?
Nothing to contribute, Convener.
Right. Thank you. So our members agreeable then we will convene our round table, and that includes some recommendations to include Neil Doncaster as well. Are members agreeable that the clerk goes away and arranges that round table? Right. And again, just can I thank William Scott and Scott Robertson for their interest in this. They've raised some really interesting issues, and hopefully then we can have a round table that resolves some of these issues that are still outstanding. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Can I move then on to the next current petition? Is PE 1412 by Bill McDowell on bonds of cation. members a note by the clerk and the submissions. As members know, the summary, I think, from Scottish Government is that they won't prioritise this work, and they are looking to consult. So there's issues, obviously, for around timescales. So one suggestion is that we actually defer to the end of the year so that we know then what the Scottish Government results of the consultation are. We don't have any control of this timescale because of the way they've prioritised or lack of priority. So end of the year is our best guess on when the consultation will be completed. So that's the reason for the rather lengthy deferment that we're suggesting. Can I ask members their views?
Yep.
John Wilson?
I would be minded to close this petition under Rule 15.7, if that's the correct rule, on the basis that clearly the Scottish Government have said they will only consider this if they have the time to consider it. There is an opportunity, and moving that we close this petition, there is an opportunity for the petitioners to come back with a fresh petition at a later date, rather than just deferring this for 10 months to be reconsidered, when we may not be any further forward in terms of the Scottish Government's programme. And I think it would be useful to, as I said, to close this petition, and with the view, if the petitioner was to bring forward a fresh petition at a time when the Scottish Government has set out its legislative programme, which may incorporate this, the petitioner's wishes, then that would be more appropriate.
Can I ask members' views on John Wilson's suggestion? Jackson Carlow?
I understand why John Wilson says that, but I'm not altogether satisfied with the government's response or its justification for a lack of action. I noticed that we are advised the Scottish Law Commission undertook a detailed review of this matter, and there was an overwhelming response in support of the move as articulated by the petitioner. And so I think this is not, although the petition has come to us through the aegis of the petitioner, he is clearly articulating a view which enjoys much wider support. And I'm curious, really, regarding the government's response, because what it does is it kind of sets out the situation and isn't terribly clear to me why it takes the view that it doesn't want to do anything about it, other than that it needs to have time. And I find that a kind of curious response. So I'm kind of minded to support your original proposition rather than let the thing drift off.
Thank you. And as members know, I think the issue is that it requires primary legislation, so there's obviously issues about parliamentary time and a willingness to cut. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Can I ask, so effectively what we've got then are a view that we close the petition for reasons that John Wilson's laid out, or the view that I think Jackson Carroll has, is that we basically defer this until at the end of the year and look at that again. So can I just get the views of members? Angus MacDonald?
Yeah, Convener, I think there's a strong argument to close it for the time being, and as John Wilson states, the petitioner does have the opportunity to come back at a later date once things have moved on somewhat.
Thank you for that. Anne McTaggart?
Can I ask, Convener, if the Scottish Government were able to, or have, for whatever reason, brought it forward, would the petitioner be alerted to that?
You mean if they decided that they were going to legislate over the next few months?
My concern is if we close the petition and the Scottish Government do bring it forward for whatever reason, would they be alerted?
Yeah, we could certainly write to the Scottish Government if we were deciding to close, and to make sure that we would keep the petitioner up to date with any developments from the Scottish Government. Jackson Carlow?
So, I also note there was a previous petition which this committee has already closed on the basis that we were going to allow the Scottish Law Commission to undertake its consultation. They've undertaken their consultation, which supports what the petitioner is asking for. A fresh petition has come to this committee, and we're now proposing to close that too, with no further progress being made, despite the fact that the commitment of the previous petition was fulfilled and the Law Commission inquiry seemed to support its conclusions. So I can't understand why we're being so unhelpful and wishing to bury the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carlock. David Torrance? We don't normally go to votes, but on my quick arithmetic, look, John Wilson?
Clearly, my understanding there is a majority to keep this petition open, convener, if we are going to keep it, and I'm quite happy to defer to that majority. The issue for me, though, would be, rather than just deferring it for another 10 months, that we seek clear assurances from the Scottish Government in relation to any timetable that they may be proposing to actually review this in light of, as Jackson Carlaw has indicated, the Scottish Law Commission report. The difficulty is that for me is keeping petitions open when we know there's no likelihood of an early resolution to that petition, and unless we get some commitment from the Scottish Government that they are going to bring this into their legislative programme in the near future, then I think when we get those assurances or an answer to the contrary, then we should reconsider the petition as early as possible.
I think then what we need to do is defer this, but at the same time write again. I know we've written to Scottish Government fairly recently saying that the decision of this committee is that we're deferring because we are very keen that Scottish Government make some active decisions in this. Please let us know about what you're doing in consultation and any future legislation, and that way we've got something focused and we can come back and look at this at a further period. Would that satisfy the committee? So I'm agreeing then that we're deferring, but we will write a chase up to Scottish Government. If we move to the next current petition is PE 1499 by Robert Watson on behalf of What About Us campaign group on creating suitable respite services for younger disabled adults with life-limiting conditions. Members have a note by the clerk and submissions. Can invite contributions from members, and again flag up the fact that there's still been a number of organisations who have not responded, which is a point I think Chick Brodie made about another petition.
Can I just say, that's, again, I come back, I'm sorry, I'm on a roll today, and there'll be more of it later, about how this committee is being treated by some people. We should ask the 4 councils that didn't reply why they haven't replied. But what's even, I find, as offensive, if I look at the COSLA letter, and I then look at the Midlothian Council letter, they're almost virtually the same. Now, some people might say, well, you might expect that. I certainly don't. And I just wonder how much effort has gone into consideration of contributions on this particular subject. That said, I'm kind of disappointed that I understand that in the current financial situation that certain things have got to be squeezed, but I just wonder why councils have not talked to, for example, the third sector and organisations like in social enterprise, etc., who might pick this up. And it'll be interesting under the procurement bill as to what services like this, how they might be picked up. So I'm disappointed there's absolutely no mention of how that might be delivered elsewhere. And in addition to which, we've got wheens of fixed of buildings and assets in local authorities, and when we're told that we can't house any of these activities, it kind of surprises me. So these two things, I think,
I should also have added that the Health and Sport Committee are having an evidence session on transition services next month, which might actually aid our understanding of this issue. Jackson Carlow?
Convener, sorry, that was the point I wanted to touch on.
Right.
In some senses, then, why would we not refer it to the Health and Sport Committee if they are having a roundtable discussion and are currently taking evidence? Do we think this is too specialised within the context of that, or does it sit comfortably within the scope of their remit?
I think if you're comfortable with making that recommendation, Mr. Carlow, I would certainly support you on that.
Well, I think that's what I would suggest then, because there's a very early opportunity for this evidence to be incorporated into that roundtable discussion, and I think that would be a sensible opportunity for them to take.
Are members agreeable with that course of action?
Yep.
Thanks, Mr Carroll, for that suggestion. So we're referring this to the Health and Sport Committee because clearly they've got an active consideration of this matter. And again, it's a very, very good petition, and I hope our colleagues, I'm sure our colleagues in Health and Sport will take this on board.
Can I still think that we need to prompt those that are asked for information to understand we don't just ask for that casually. Yeah. We expect them to answer because we've got to serve the people who sit at the other end of this table. And also, I'd like to understand why Midlothian Council chose to just lift the COSLA paper without giving any independent assessment of how it affects their council.
Well, I think Chip Brody is a good point. I think what we can do, we can still refer this to Health and Sport, but we can also ask the people who haven't written in why they didn't write in and raise the points that Chip Brody's raised if the committee is agreeable. Can I move to the next current petition? It's PE 1493 by Peter John Gordon on a Sunshine Act for Scotland. Members of a note by the clerk, the spice briefings on international legislation proposals and submissions. Obviously, there's a number of possible options for action. I think, again, this is a very strong petition, a very interesting petition. I mean, one possibility, for example, is that we write to Scottish Government to clarify what information is requested from NHS boards and confirm that all health board responses will be forwarded to the committee for consideration as written evidence. And there's obviously other options like writing to Department of Health to seek its response. But again, I throw it open to committee members for views. John Wilson?
No comments, Convener.
Sorry, Jackson Carroll?
Well, I note in the notes we have that the Department of Health have actually said they do intend to provide a response. It is quite a big issue of principle and would have quite an important effect on policy. So on this occasion, I'm inclined to give a little bit more time where perhaps a discussion has to inform any response that we receive. And I would simply want to prompt at this stage those who have not, and as you have suggested, the Scottish Government, in order that, I don't think there's anybody trying to frustrate our consideration of this. I think it would be better just to wait until we are able to do so on a more informed basis.
That we continue this petition right to in terms of option 2 that I outlined earlier. Right, thank you for that. The next current petition is PE 1495 by Rob Wilson on behalf of Accountability Scotland on the use of gagging clauses and agreements with NHS staff in Scotland. Members of a note by the clerk could invite contributions from members.
Can I,
Chip Brody?
Yeah, firstly, I think we have to recognise the work that has been done by Rob Wilson and people with him on this. Regrettably, I've, in the last 2 months, had 2 issues of this actually happening in medical practices and in a hospital in Ayrshire and Arran, which have been taken up personally because they affected me personally. But again, I don't understand why this issue is not taken seriously. Again, if I look at, first of all, NHS Highlands and NHS Borders don't feel this is of such import that they need to respond to the committee. It's the first thing. Second thing is, if I look at the response that we've had from NHS Lothian and NHS Grampian, guess what? The answer to the first question is exactly the same. So how much interest is there really in this if it's too easy to pick up somebody else's written statement and just simply, present that to us? And as I say, if you look at the first question on the NHS Lothian paper response and NHS Grampian, they are exactly the same, which raises the issue with me. I think some of the things that are being done require to be audited and faithfully followed. I think the Minister's committed, the Cabinet Secretary is committed to that. But this whole issue of making things available, whether it's online, or making training available, whether it's online or not, we have to establish the meaningful outcome as established in the letter from the Cabinet Secretary and in various statements, and in those health services that have had at least had the decency to reply. But we need to understand that all of these things, like the HR online system, the preventing and dealing with bullying and harassment policy, that the outcomes are as we anticipate, which is a very open and transparent system. I would also like, if it were possible, to see some of these settlement agreements as they are now suitably redacted. Of course, there have to be some where there are employee confidentiality agreements, but you know, in terms of practice, I'd like to make sure that these things are actually being applied. And at some stage, there might be a request to Audit Scotland to go in and check that once these plans are in place, that they are effected the way in which they are meant to be, and certainly effected in the manner in which we expect them to be applied.
Carlo?
I hear what Mr Brodie says, and I'm not normally one to rush to the defence of the government, but it's clear from the response from the Cabinet Secretary that the Scottish Government does not support an outright ban on the use of confidentiality clauses, and I think that is a very clear statement of the Scottish Government's position in relation to the petition. Thereby, it seems to me that the progress of this petition beyond that, it becomes a more political consideration rather than one in which this committee can hope to affect the outcome. And for those reasons, although I think the issue is very important, I think it now becomes one of party politics. And in those circumstances, I'm minded to move to close the petition.
Just before I bring Chip, I should also have added that unfortunately, again, there's still some organisations who haven't yet responded, so there's just a bit about completeness that I should have mentioned at the start. Chip Brodie?
Yeah, I totally disagree with what Jackson Carlo said. This is not an issue of party politics. I'm being as robust as I can in terms of challenging the government and the associated government agencies to ensure that the outcomes that we're expecting, which is openness and transparency. Of course, there have to be confidentiality or settlement agreements in terms of personal compensation or things like that. And that is acceptable. What's not acceptable is that, that within these, and government says itself, and I support that any attempt to stop people indicating processes that might be against the safety and interests of both employees and patients is unacceptable. I mean, yes, we have to have settlement agreements.
I understand that. What is the object then of the committee's ongoing work? I think is what I'm unclear about. If the government has said they won't.
The end objective, certainly from my point of view, is that
to change the government's view.
We don't have one. No, I think the government's view is clear. What we have to do is make sure that at the end of the day we are progressing to a situation where the outcomes are that there are no cases of bullying or harassment in the health service.
Other colleagues wish to come in? John Wilson?
Yeah, I think Mr Brodie's right to continue to raise concerns in the way that some of these confidentiality agreements or, as has been described by the petitioners, gagging orders are being placed upon staff. I think the response that Mr Finlay received from the Cabinet Secretary, there is a paragraph at the bottom of page 1, which I think raises the issue that the Cabinet Secretary is keen to try and ensure that no one should be have an order placed upon them to stop them from speaking out when it comes to patient safety or treatment. And I think that's where we can maybe try, as you've suggested, Convener, write to those organisations who have not responded as yet, but also write to the Scottish Government to seek assurances from the Scottish Government that they are doing everything in their power within the NHS boards in Scotland to ensure that they are not unduly using or not subjecting conditions on staff that basically come about as gagging orders to stop people speaking out. Because I think the concern is that while the Cabinet Secretary can make general comment, the relationship, as I understand it, between the doctor, the nurse, the staff member within the NHS is with the board. It's not with the Scottish Government. So therefore, the employer employee contractual arrangement is between the NHS board and the employee. But what we need to try and do is ensure that the Scottish Government are sending out a clear message to boards and to managers within the health boards that we would not tolerate the use of gagging orders to deny staff the opportunities to speak out where they see wrongdoing is taking place. And I think that's something we can write to the Scottish Government to seek clarification on. But as I said, we are mired in the problem at the present moment of employee-employer relationships, which the Scottish Government nor the Cabinet Secretary for Health have any control over. The legislation and guidance in relation to employer-employee relationships through employment legislation is currently vested with Westminster. But what we can do is certainly impress upon the Cabinet Secretary to get the message out to health boards throughout Scotland that we expect them to treat all staff, whether or not they're raising issues in relation to patient safety or working practices, that these staff are actually protected from and have the right to continue to raise those issues.
I think that's a useful point. That's why I think, quite keen that we make sure we have all the responses before we make a final decision on this, because we've had examples in other areas where the Scottish Government have laid down policies on health, and health boards have interpreted it in slightly different ways. And it may be their speed of response has been different. And we've had that with insulin pumps, where we've had a world of difference between one health board area and another. So that's an analogy for employment rights. We need to make sure we get responses from all the health boards, in my view, before we make a final decision on what we do. So I would recommend we write to all those who still to respond and discuss it when we get the responses back.
Can I just re-emphasise, it's not a question of, and John's right, and that's why I made the point about employee-employer relationships in terms of legislation or compensation that affects them. I think the Cabinet Secretary has actually put out a pretty clear message. The point I wanted, the reason I want to keep this going is I want to see what the outcomes are of the actions that we are told are taking place to make sure that they are effective. And until we're absolutely sure, then I don't think we should be shutting this off at all.
Any other members from Angus MacDonald? So I think the majority view was that we continue this to make sure we chase up the responses and we look at this at a future period. Thank you for that. If I now move to our final current petition, I'll give Elaine Smith a second to join us, is PE 1463 by Lorraine Cleaver on effective thyroid and adrenal testing, diagnosis and treatment. Members have a note by the clerk and the submissions. I welcome Elaine Smith, and I'll come back to Elaine Smith in a second. Members will also note that since the last time the committee considered this petition, two of the petitioners, Marion Dyer and Sandra White, have indicated they no longer wish to be involved in the petition. And I'm sure members would wish to join me in thanking Marion Dyer and Sandra White on their efforts with the petition and wish them all well in the future. Can I ask Elaine Smith if she'd like to give us a brief contribution? I know Elaine Smith's had a lot of interest in this particular petition and a lot of expertise. Elaine Smith.
Thank you very much, Convener. Can I start by thanking the committee actually for the time they've taken in looking at this so far and for taking it seriously, because that does give hope to hundreds, if not thousands of particularly women, but not only, in Scotland. Also, could I just mention that the last time I was in front of the committee, I was going to a conference, and I believe that the video is available, so I don't know if the committee have been able to see that, because it was an excellent conference that involved patients and people from the professions, so that was particularly good, so I just want to raise that. Can I also thank the committee for reading the personal stories that I handed out. Unfortunately, because a number of them wanted to remain anonymous, they can't be in the public domain. And I think part of that is that people are often frightened. They're frightened that they'll be struck off from their GPs. That's a fear that runs through telling their stories. And also there's the issue of GPs, of course, being frightened that they'll be struck off, for example, for diagnosing desiccated thyroid hormone. And on that issue, can I just advise the committee of the sad death of Dr. Skinner, whom you'll have heard a lot about. Dr. Skinner did give patients desiccated thyroid hormone, and that has left a lot of patients, which you may have read in some of the stories, desperate to know what's going to happen to them and how they're going to stay well in the future if they can't get it prescribed. Convener, could I turn to, if you don't mind, the Scottish Government letter that you received specifically? Under the first paragraph of that, it mentions that there's no evidence base. Sorry, the second paragraph. I want to come to the more positive paragraph in a moment, but under the first one, where it says that the Scottish Government has no plans to set up a short-life working group because there's no evidence base to support the changes being sought by the petition. I think that's a bit dispiriting for the petitioner, and I think perhaps it's based on maybe not listening to patients and hearing the stories because they're parked on thyroxine. So they then, patients who are on thyroxine, who are told they have an underactive thyroid, they're told, if you take this pill, you'll be fine. So they don't know then that the ME they've been diagnosed with, or the hair loss, the weight gain, the heart trouble, the heart disease, the fibromyalgia and the depression. They don't connect all those with the thyroid problem, and it seems to me that GPs don't tend to do that either. And there's another issue around that of the Quality and Outcomes Framework guidance, because I understand that there's sort of points given, if you like, for diagnosis, and there's a lot less points given for diagnosis of thyroid treatment, for example, than there is for diagnosing depression. But actually, depression can be part of the thyroid diagnosis. So I just want to raise that as something that's worrying in the whole issue. Also, the government talk about perhaps not needing research. I think that's because I think what we do need is research to find the evidence, and research that's not funded by Big Pharma, if I might say so. Research that is actually funded in a different way to get the outcomes that don't lead back to thyroxine being the be-all and end-all for thyroid problems. So that's the part about that particular part of the government letter. The second part of the government letter does seem more positive, saying that they will commission a piece of work, but I'm not quite clear if that's specifically based on thyroid conditions. I don't know if that just means all conditions, and maybe the committee know better on that. So, obviously the committee have to make a decision today, one way or another, whether to continue the petition or what to do. And if that's a matter for the committee, but if I might be so bold as to put my own opinion on the record, which is that the committee could keep it open to wait for the outcome of that piece of work that the government are carrying out, and then to review what that piece of work brings forward. Or, of course, consider that this is such a huge issue, and you maybe see that from some of the stories that you'll have read. Maybe consider your own inquiry, as you've done with other health issues, in actual fact other health issues like vitamin D and diabetes, which all also tie back to thyroid problems, sometimes in quite a lot of cases in one way or another. So you could also, of course, do your own inquiry. But I do think that getting this far and getting action and getting attention to it has been an excellent thing. Patients have been brought back literally from the dead, like myself, and I've no hesitation in saying that. And also, if these issues could be addressed properly and patients could get onto the right treatment, it could save the NHS an absolute fortune in the long run. And that brings me to the final issue, which is that there's still an issue with there only being one supplier of T3 in Scotland, and at the moment I understand that a batch of T3 has less potency than other batches, and again that's causing people to be ill at the moment. So the issues are ongoing. I would personally be grateful if the committee would consider keeping the petition going to see what the outcome of the government deliberations is, and also consider looking into the issues further yourselves. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Elaine Smith, for our time and her efforts on this issue. It's been very helpful. Elaine Smith made a couple of suggestions, and there's also suggestions in our briefing paper. My view certainly is that it's important to keep this petition going, and I would like to write to the Scottish Government to seek further details on the timescale for the works committed to undertake in relation to the petition. That doesn't rule out doing anything further, but I think we need to get that raw material. In the meantime, if committee agreeable, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't write to government as well about this issue of the supplier of T3. It may be that government feels it's not within their remit, but obviously getting supplies of key medication in Scotland is a sort of devolved issue. It should be interesting to see what the review is on that. But anyway, I'd like to throw it on to members for their view. Chip Brodie?
Well, I generally agree. I'm not sure the right to... on the drugs issue, there's a much wider issue. I mean, this is very important, clearly. But there's a much wider issue in terms of, I believe, of drug issuance and procurement. But that's for another place. But certainly, I would support the action.
Jackson Carlo?
The roundtable discussion that we had and the very personal testimony that we've received and borne witness to, I am actually rather disappointed by and disheartened by the government's response, I have to say. I think also Elaine Smith made a very pertinent point when she said there is a degree of ambiguity in terms of this piece of work that's to be undertaken, in that it does look as if it might be going to broaden the issue up to be one of generality way beyond the particular area that we've been focused on. So it would be helpful when you write in relation to the timelines just to get some idea of the scope of this, because I think if it's going to be every kind of condition, then what I want to see is progress in relation to the condition about which we've taken a great deal of evidence and have a degree of understanding. And it may be I wouldn't necessarily take the same view about other conditions if it was just being considered in the general sense, which might lead to no action being taken at all. So I think that it's important that the thing that we have been looking at isn't lost in the middle of a discussion about a whole lot of other things too.
Fair point.
I mean, for example, in treatment in areas where the evidence is limited, well, that's homeopathic medicine. I mean, we could be a way off down all manner of side routes, I think, if we're not careful at that point. So it's important that we don't lose sight of the thing we want to discuss.
Be more specific, exactly. Angus MacDonald?
Yes, thanks, thanks, Convener. I'll certainly be keen to get further details from the Scottish Government on the timescale for the work. However, I think we should maybe bear in mind Elaine Smith's suggestion of, with regard to the merits of an inquiry, and certainly keep that on the table for future consideration.
Thank you for that. Any other members? Anne McTaggart?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Really, not to reiterate what everyone else has suggested, but really to highlight the concern of Elaine Smith's concern earlier on about the T3 and its limitations just now, and about the production of that. And I'm aware we have approached the Cabinet Secretary before, but I think it's extremely important that we do find out his views on that.
Florence?
I'm happy to go along with your recommendations.
Thank you for that. John Wilson?
Convener, similar to comments that have been made by other members, I think we need clarification in the Scottish Government letter, paragraph 3, and what exactly they're going to investigate. I think Jackson Carroll is right. We need to get real clarification, because unfortunately there are a number of conditions that could be subjected to this type of investigation, because we have dealt, as this committee has dealt with a number of issues that have come before us, and I think Elaine Smith alluded to some of these conditions that could overlap into a wider debate. But in terms of the treatment of patients with this condition, we need to get the government to respond more positively in relation to how they're dealing with this. An interesting point Elaine Smith made in terms of the potency of T3 and the issue that patients feel that there is something changed within the medication that is actually making it less effective. And I know that other conditions, patients have made reference to this type of effect where they just feel they're not getting the same impact from the medication that's been given to them in relation to their condition. So it would be useful, I think, if we write to the Scottish Government to ask them to investigate, if they can, the relative strengths of the medication that's being given to patients, so that we're actually seeing a consistent dosage and strength, or whatever consistency in terms of the medication being given, particularly given that we only have one supplier, and the supplier effectively has a monopoly in relation to the provision of this drug at the present time. And that's something else I think we should say to the Scottish Government, that we really need to be very careful about monopoly supplies of individual drugs, and that we should be trying to seek out the best deal for not only the patients but the NHS in Scotland.
Thank you for that. And so in summary then, we're obviously continuing the petition. We're going to write to the Scottish Government in the terms that identified earlier, and we're going to raise the issue of the monopoly supplier, which a number of members have looked at. And obviously we'll keep options open for the future in terms of any future tactics such as inquiry once we get further information back. Is that good? Are members all agreeable with that course of action? I'm going to thank Elaine Smith again for coming along, and I'll move quickly now just to agenda item 4, which is inquiry into tackling child sexual exploitation in Scotland. So as members know, following publication of the committee's report, a debate was held in the Chamber, and in terms of the agreed protocol, the Scottish Government would normally respond to any committee report not later than 2 months after publication of the report. So a formal response is expected on the 11th of March. However, that doesn't stop the committee doing any other action we wish, and I've certainly had some discussions with Jack Brodie about this, that we could, in fact, write to the Minister in advance of her formal written response, emphasising how important this inquiry is, and asking her to give us an early response, or reinforcing that she picks up the 28 recommendations and adopts them. But that's obviously, purely a matter for the committee. There will be a formal timescale, but if members wish, we could chase this up a bit quicker. Chip Brodie, I think you had
you've embraced all the comment that I made to you, and of course with your own. I just felt this was so important, and given that historically we've sort of lapsed into, not into unconsciousness regarding this issue, I think it's important that we maintain the high profile that it requires and ensure that action is pursued.
Members of John Wilson?
Convener, can I just seek clarification as to why you think asking for an earlier response than the 11th of March would be relevant to this committee? Because my understanding is the next committee the next meeting of this committee will be the 4th of March, and therefore any response we receive on the 11th of March would be a timely response for our meeting on the 18th. So I'm not sure why we feel, because I'd rather have a considered response to the points that we've made in the recommendations to the Minister, rather than trying to rush ahead and get a response that may miss out and misconstrue some of the recommendations that has been made by this committee. So it's just seeking clarification, Convener, considering you proposed that we urge the Scottish Government to respond earlier than the timetable that's already been set.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Olsen, I think I was just reflecting the conversation I had with, with Jack Brodie. I mean, we know what the statutory position is, and 8 weeks is not 8 months. We will get a response within that time period, and it's purely a matter for the committee. I merely raised a point that was addressed to me. Jackson Carroll, I think you had a point.
I'm content to wait until the 11th of March on the basis that, in fact, we might end up getting the government's response to the report sooner than we would get a response to the letter requesting that they report to us sooner than the official date.
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly relaxed about just waiting for the week period. I just merely thought that would just reflect some comments that I'd had. Do any other members have a view on this?
I think just for clarity, I mean, I'm happy if we do that. The purpose and the intent behind my request to the convener was that when the reply comes back, that we don't sort of allow this to be shuffled off to the side as great inquiry, great debate, and thanks very much. I mean, the thing is so important that we want to see some action.
Exactly. And as members know, there was a high sort of media interest in this, quite rightly. And just for completeness, this week I was approached by the Times Educational Supplement, who are doing something, I think, next week. And Angus MacDonald will be glad to know that BBC Alpa are running it on their magazine programme this week. Yeah. Yeah. Angus MacDonald?
What I'm not so pleased to know about is the recent decision by my local authority to reduce funding for Open Secret, which certainly doesn't help matters, and I'll be making a representation to the local authority on that decision over the next few days.
John Wilson?
Angus MacDonald's quite right to raise an important issue. We've tabled a report as a committee We stressed in that report the need for services to continue to be delivered, but not only delivered, enhanced, to ensure that we can actually deal with this. And yet we have a situation that Angus MacDonald's quite rightly identified, where local authorities are taking decisions ahead of what may be recommendations from the Scottish Government. So it might be useful, if you are desperate to write to the Minister on this issue, Convener, that we write to the Minister to seek clarification on the discussions that have taken place with local authorities ahead of any report produced by the Scottish Government in relation to our report on child sexual exploitation, and to find out whether or not there will be additional funding or additional encouragement for local authorities to continue to deliver and enhance the delivery of services which tackle the issues of child sexual exploitation in Scotland.
Chip Brody?
No, I agree with that. I mean, again, my sole objective is probably more emotional than anything else, is to make sure that we do not allow this under any circumstances to be put on the back burner. And I think John Wilson's recommendation is opposite in terms of what we need to do.
Members' views? So, sorry, John Wilson was suggesting that we write to the Minister as far as the role of local authorities in this issue.
Yeah, and then drawing attention, Convener, sorry, to the decision by the Falkirk Council to withdraw funding or reduce funding to Open Secret, because I think it would be relevant and it would help, hopefully, the Minister, when they do respond to the report, to identify and indicate where the Scottish Government see local authorities in relation to the delivery of these services.
Is that agreeable?
Yep.
Can I formally close the committee meeting and ask members to stay behind for 1 second? There's something we need to talk about in the next petitions. I could ask the gallery to clear. Thank you.